It's not just like, hey guys, like practice mutual aid and help each other and everything's going to be fixed, because the system is rigged to orient you towards looking out for yourself and towards quote unquote winning and competition. And so to some degree, I think some of it is going to be about when you are a person of color and or a marginalized person and you believe in and you buy into these concepts, then you are in a position of power to make some of these decisions. Make these decisions, just do it. That's number one. Just do it.
Welcome to another episode of the Circle Back Club, a podcast for workers who are tired of being told the problem is us. We're here to give you the history, the language, and the honesty to understand what's actually happening at work and imagine something different together. I'm Lars.
And I'm Aparna.
Today, we are going to talk about something that it might be uncomfortable for a lot of people who spent years building their brands, figuring out how to negotiate the perfect salary, finding the elevator pitch that will get you that next job, that next gig. We are asking whether self-advocacy, the whole apparatus, from the girl boss, lean in, chief, the wing, rest in peace, ladies get paid, the hustle of individual advancement, is that really enough? And if not self-advocacy, then what are we doing?
And to break some of these things down with us, our guest today is Hala Saleh. Hala, you're a technologist with more than 20 years of experience. You're also the founder of Hala. You named it after yourself, which is so brave and confident. It's a community space in the greater Seattle area built around connection, belonging, and care. And someone who has been speaking very loudly about mutual aid at work as a survival strategy for this moment. In your own words, you said, Hala will always try to feed you. And I can personally attest to that. As I was eating, low key, Hala's like, I'm making dinner. It's lamb chops. Yeah. It wasn't hamburger helper or I don't know. And there were vegetables too. So Hala will always try to feed you because the fight for liberation requires fuel, and food is love, and love is food. You also write, you have 2 different Substacks, and we're going to link to both of those in the show notes so that people can find you. Welcome to the Circle Back Club.
Welcome.
Thanks so much. Thanks for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here. I've been binging all your episodes so far. So it's great to be talking to like-minded people. So thank you. So our guiding question for today, just to seed things for everybody, is when the system is designed to exhaust you individually, what does it mean to win together? And what if the most powerful thing that we as people with historically marginalized identities can do right now is to stop advocating for ourselves and start building with and for each other? Our episode today really is focused on this myth of self-advocacy, this girl boss playbook that I think a lot of us have played ourselves. And I'll say that, even as I was starting to think about this episode and started to script it, this has been the hardest one for me to get ready for, because I myself leaned in so hard into this girl boss life in 2017. I was a single girl in my early 30s. I went to all of the lean in events. I was in the Bumble Queen Bee ambassador programs, super cringe name. I was often speaking at the wing, and I, was doing these salary negotiation workshops and building my network and creating my brand and oh my gosh, and calling myself an investor and just doing all of the things that I'm like, God, that was so embarrassing. Why did you do that? I feel so embarrassed when I think about that phase of my life.
Yeah, and I'm guessing the advice didn't exactly pan out. What happened?
Well, we've talked about so many things already in this podcast, right? About what didn't work out.
But I don't think that there was like any one moment. It was just like many of these little moments that kind of all came to a head for me. But the first one was in 2019. I had a startup called Future for Us. We did a lot of networking for women of color. And an elder in our community asked me, she said, "Well, why are you building a networking organization for women of color without women of color?" And I kind of went, duh, like obviously it's for women of color. But what she meant was, why aren't we building with women in professions where women of color are over indexed, right? Where they're represented, the frontline and hourly workers, the care workers, the educators. And why are we only focusing on already upwardly mobile women of color? And that was a really hard moment for me. I've come back to that conversation many times. And before we could really solve for it as a startup, the pandemic really shut us down. We were a year old when we went into lockdown. And and then there's like a sting that I feel every time I see data on women's advancement specifically. And I think, gosh, like, why is the needle not moving faster, right? Like this McKinsey Women in Workplace report that comes out every year, and the graphs are kind of interchangeable year to year. And very recently, I think just in the past year, almost every single week, I've had a conversation with somebody who did all of the right things. They worked really hard. They did their like 18 networking events. They lived on 4 hours of sleep for years and years on end. And you guys are nodding, right? And you're like, yeah, me too. Like I
Mhm.
also survived somehow on 4 hours of sleep for years. And yet they are the first ones to get laid off or to get demoted or to get blamed or to be shown the door. And I've just been sitting with this idea of like, well, we did all of the things that we were told to do. Like we asked for our promotions and we tried to negotiate our pay and we asked for the stretch assignments that came with no extra pay. And yet we're in this really stuck place. And I'm curious, like, if either of you have found yourself in that place.
Yeah. It feels like that is actually, I feel like it's built into the system. It's built into the way that the system was designed, and it's almost even an indication that the system is working as it was designed. Um, when I think about how, why that continues to happen and the cyclical nature of like seeing this with myself, with friends, with others that are marginalized in these organizations, it's just that the inherent structure and the hierarchy that is inherent in these hyper capitalistic like orgs, it requires that there are people who do the brunt of the work and take all of the hit and get a fraction of the pay. And combine that with the fact that we just live in patriarchy, and specifically this like current phase of patriarchy where it's just like unhinged.
Mhm.
um, it just makes it so that the default groups that are taking the hit are women and femmes and marginalized groups. And I just feel like it's getting amplified. I mean, I have personal stories. Last year, I got let go from a startup where I was responsible for launching product from zero, from scratch. But I came in and I led engineering team as well as product. I brought in process that just never existed before I came in, and created the capability and ability for them to actually even launch something into the market. And when their investors looked at their numbers and they, basically spoke into the ear of the execs and the CEO and whatnot, they were like, you need to look leaner. You need to have less cost. You need to invest less in product and invest more in sales because you're not selling. And I was let go. And I had like pennies upon what they owned in the company in stock
Mm.
options, right? Stock options that vest at certain um, requirements, which is basically your cost, right? You're
Yeah.
required to spend a certain amount of time. It's not even about your contribution or what you've actually done. It's more about how quote unquote loyal and this culture of loyalty to a corporation or to an organization exists. And anyway, ultimately, I was let go and didn't get what should have been my fair share in terms of what I contributed. And that's just one story of many. Um, so yeah, if the co-founders had implemented, on the other hand, some of the principles of community and collectivism and all of that, this situation could have gone in a much different direction. And I keep thinking about that. Like, how would I have handled it differently?
That like having to ask that question, how could I have handled it differently? When, yeah, the bottom line is serving the shareholder, the carrot of stocks that are vesting and never ending in front of you. They like truly are impossible conditions. And I'm thinking about coaching clients where it's really common for me to work with people who are at a place where they're burnt out or at that like they can't take it anymore. Toxicity is addicting.
Mm.
So like you crash out, and then you get the next opportunity and you think maybe this time I'm going to rig it differently. And so actually what I'm reflecting on and what I've seen is the way that we go up and down in the spikes of like, you know, Hala, to your point where you're like, you've gone through an experience where you've been pushed out, your intellectual property is no longer your own, but there's no actual like recognition of the labor and creation that you've done. And we are all back to asking, what could I have done differently? Which is, you know, so core to the myth of what we're talking about today around self-advocacy. Like it's never actually about ourselves. But the way that the toxicity runs for people is we get burnt out and then we go back in and we try again. And I think that's something that I've experienced personally in my career as well, with like the spikiness of it. And it's really hard to step back and carve a new path when you're perpetually trying to figure it out by yourself.
Can I share a thought on the burnout? On the burnout, I actually have been thinking about burnout a lot lately, and I think that the conclusion that I've reached around the conditions that create burnout is that burnout comes from a lack of reciprocity. So you can be doing some of the most fulfilling community work and it feels good and purpose driven and whatever, and you can still burn out like you're in a corporation when that community also isn't reciprocating and giving back, which is why the concept of mutual aid is where I feel like it needs to be taught. Reciprocity needs to be taught because it's not just about serving and giving, and women and femmes and people who have typically been given the role of serving and service are expected to serve, and there isn't the same expectation of reciprocation. And so that's kind of where I feel like that feeling of burnout is just continues to perpetuate, because it's like, here's a little carrot, here's a little carrot, here's a little carrot, but give us your 150%.
As you were saying that, I was also thinking about the hierarchy of reciprocity. And so I think I've talked about this book before, at least with Lars. It's called Entitled by Kate Mann, a professor who writes about gender dynamics and how women behave a certain way, like in certain ways, because they feel the pressure to give, right? And they're not actually receiving very much in return. And then white women then lean down on minoritized groups because they're looking to those groups to give, and they're not going to reciprocate. And so I think in work as well, you know, we see these hierarchies of the lack of reciprocity where that might not actually be the case. Oftentimes, like the most giving people are the front desk manager, someone's EA, right? And who is giving anything to that person? And by the way, like 9 out of 10 times, that person is probably a woman or, right, like a femme identifying human.
Right.
And that, yeah, I feel like that really is, I think you making the connection between burnout and reciprocity is really powerful. So I actually want to jump ahead, and you made this video, I think maybe a couple of months ago. And Lars, I want to play it for you because I think that there's so much Hala says in that I don't want to paraphrase it. That is a really powerful invitation for workers in general. So, okay, let me play this.
So we're expanding our definition of mutual aid, yes? It doesn't just mean giving people cash. It doesn't just mean, it's by no means charity. It's reciprocation. It's a give and take. One way that you can perform mutual aid, and I'm talking to my friends and people that are in the tech industry, but this extends beyond that. Any industry where you are in a position where you are able to make decisions about how the company spends money, and you have friends who are out here looking for work, trying to supplement their income or trying to make an income, and they don't have steady work, hire those friends. Make those decisions. Help them get work. You are not doing your company a favor by saving them money and by introducing maximum efficiency. They make you feel like you are because that's in their best interest. But if there is work to be done and you have the ability to make decisions and you can give people work, give them work. Help each other out.
I've watched that video probably 20 times. Lars, I think this is the first time you're listening to it. I'm just curious,
Yeah.
like, what came up for you?
What's coming up for me is like, what are we doing? Like what are we doing? And it really is like, it's not complicated to come back to how do I share resources with the person next to me? How do I trust that the person that I'm connected to can step into an opportunity and I can advocate for them to make that happen while championing their autonomy and trusting that to exactly what we were talking about, that like this can be reciprocal. This is non-transactional. I think if someone hears that outside of the context of mutual aid, we're talking about sponsorship. We're talking about like a transactional feeding to get someone a gig. But when you're sitting under the frame of mutual aid, which one of the most important tenets of it is when we are in this reciprocal nature, I also am not owed information about what happens next. Like, you don't have to prove anything to me. I don't have to know what you do with the resource that I give. And it's the same with jobs. It's like the point is we are standing up to help each other be able to meet our material needs, and we use our network to be able to support that with open arms, with that release of just that. So that's what comes up to me when I hear that. And I think it's been like something that, like when you take it into how do you see yourself and what you are deserving of when asking other people for help, especially professionally. There's a lot of unlearning that we need to do to be able to make it possible for us to even be in those types of relationships. So that was a long reflection, but like that's what comes up for me when I hear that.
Hala, you've talked about the fact that mutual aid isn't charity.
Yeah.
Right. We know that this is how men, in particular white men, this is how they build their wealth, their access. They don't consider it an act of charity when they invest in each other's companies or when they hire their peer's kid for an internship. But I'm curious, like, will you say a little bit more about why this is not charity?
I'll say too that video was created very much spur of the moment as a rant after I had a kind of reconnecting call with a former ex coworker of mine who actually I managed, who is a white man within large organizations that have budget to hire people as consultants, as contractors, as whatnot. And I was just chatting with him and had this aha moment realization in the middle of the conversation that like I will always bite my tongue when it comes to saying what I need with you.
Okay.
Because you are not somebody that I will trust to say, I am in a place of need. I need work. I'm good at what I do. And you know that because I managed you. And can you put my name in a room, right? Can you say my name in a room? And I knew that I would have to keep it at like, oh yeah, this is what I'm doing, casual. This is, yeah, if you have anything around that's like, you think I could do, like, would be great to know and find out about that. Because there is a superiority, there is a scarcity mindset. There is if I got to the top and bring this person in that is good, then that might get taken away from me. And those are the reasons why we don't in these organizations help each other out, because they've created that belief within us that like you are out to make it for yourself. So yes, mutual aid should not be seen as charity. And the reason why, and it's very humbling, right? To get to these points in your life where you're like, I need help. I need help. And I can't therapy my way out of it, or take a loan my way out of it, or pretend I'm not in a place of need. We will all have moments in our lives to varying degrees and for different reasons why we will need to be able to call on other people to help. And so if you view it that way, in terms of like tallying up all of the things that we're all doing for each other, I'm doing something for somebody, but I know that somebody else, it doesn't have to be that same person. At some point, I will come to a crossroads where someone else I will need them to do something for me. And so that in that sense is what I mean by it's not charity. It's actually your responsibility to contribute to continuing this cyclical system of like give and take. And we have to practice it. We have to practice it. So the narrative that's been persisted in Western cultures, in capitalistic environments, is that like, you know, what's the term? Pull yourself up from your bootstraps, right? Like this Ayn Rand, you know, individual, like do what's best for you, and that will be what's best for everybody else. And it's perpetuated because the more we believe in that, the less we lean on each other, and the less of community we build. And actually, the more we build community and we see each other as a collective, the more we can actually disrupt the oppression that's happening within these systems. The more we can stand up together when we are like, oh, that's not cool. Like, it's not cool that you guys have this policy for us at this company, or we don't like that, because now we see ourselves as individuals within the system. And so I can't do anything on my own. Like, I don't like that they're asking me to come work on a Black Friday, but I'm not going to say anything when it's just me, you know? So that's how, what I mean when I say like it's not charity, it's actually like mutual responsibility. And it's funny because a lot of our cultures, whether it's like indigenous cultures, collectivist cultures, it actually comes very naturally. I remember growing up in Jordan and in Kuwait, I never saw a homeless person on the street. And that is because it is embedded in the DNA, in the culture of the fabric of like the social contract, is that when there is somebody in need and somebody who has something that can benefit that person in need, you give it, because the next Friday you're going to be hungry.
Yeah. Speaking of hunger, I think I've shared this with both of you, that I have a neighbor who, you know, like politically and ideologically, I don't know that we have a ton in common when we think through kind of a Western lens of like social justice values and social justice ways of being. But over time, right, like what I've noticed is that within the scope of whatever she can provide, she is so giving. And there have been periods of my work life where things have been super hectic. I haven't had a lot of time to cook. And she will leave meals for me in my Ridwell container outside my door frequently, multiple times a week. And she's not keeping track of how many meals she's providing for me. And when I share that with people, right, like when I share that with people, the fact that, you know, she feeds me pretty regularly. And then occasionally I like help her out by hanging out with her kids, which is honestly helping me out because I love kids and it's good for my mental health to be with them. Most white folks that I share that with, they'll say to me, oh, so you're babysitting for free.
Yeah.
Why are you babysitting for free? And I'm like, how do you want me to quantify the value of spending an hour at the park with two, by the way, very well-behaved kids? They're not breaking things. They're not being like noisy. They're just being kids. They're having fun. And I get to be a part of that. How do you want me to quantify? What should I be getting paid for this, right? And I hear the same thing. People will ask me, they're like, oh my gosh, you're such a good cheerleader for so and so. You know, like you should think about charging a referral fee.
Yeah.
Have you thought of charging a referral fee for sending people work or making connections that end up becoming productive?
Oh,
So, Lars, what is the referral fee that you will be giving to me?
Yeah, so like, whoa, I'm in debt. Um, I think like for both of your examples, the center is intrinsic trust. Like if we are living in true mutual responsibility, to your point, Hala, then I am trusting that when we are sharing our resources in any capacity, that's just it, that the trust is there. I remember when I went to Morocco this summer, my mind as a white person indoctrinated in the United States culture was blown when someone I was spending time with was like, next time you come to Morocco, just show up. Don't make a plan on where you're going to stay, what you're going to eat. Just show up and talk to people, and people are going to put you up. And I started crying because I like my body, I could not fathom that form of cultural generosity and the amount of aliveness that exists culturally, because that is the cornerstone. Yeah, like it really changed what I thought was, it's like in the United States, we're like reading books on mutual aid, we're like trying to strategize it, we're trying to figure it out, we think and think and think it. And then you step into cultures where that is central, and it's just the softening that it does to the system is incredible. And it's literal trust.
Mm.
I just want that for everybody. I want everybody to feel that.
And I mean, it's a big part of Arab culture. It's a big part of Indian culture where, yeah, like your home and your heart can always make a little bit of room for another person. It's not uncommon. It's not an uncommon to have people come and stay with you, and you just make space. You just make space.
My grandma, my teta, she taught me food that was made for two can feed four. And if it can feed four, it can feed eight. And like that expansive view on like what's enough was very much a cornerstone of my learning.
You saying that really makes me miss my grandmother, which is not this. This is not the conversation that we set out on. And I just, I mean, not everything is incredible, I would say, about our cultures. And there is also really deep patriarchy. There is also a lot of misogyny. But I think that there is a kind of like sharing and reciprocity, and that it happens without keeping tabs. And the idea that you can just pass it on. I don't have to be reciprocal with you for feeding me lamb chops. I might feed somebody else the next day. And none of us is keeping tabs about how it's moving, right? Because we're responsible for everybody, right? We're collectively responsible for the world that we want to live in. And yeah, and where I have struggled is like, how do we convince our peers to take those ideas to work? How do we put them to work at work? How do we create that, mutuality in places where we're so conditioned to compete?
Yeah, and what we do is we make a policy about it.
Not the policy.
Right? I mean, like, we do. We regulate it. And it's sad because there's so much longing behind that. I think there's so much need for connection, for mutuality, but just where we are in late stage capitalism is like, okay, we got to regulate it. We got to create the policy. I think DEI is a really interesting example of this, where if we look at hiring, it's like we have diverse slates, bias training, the structured interviews in theory in service of making hiring equitable. And at the same time, and at the end of the day, it's just relationships. Like the thing that we're trying to like policy into actually requires human connection. but we are perpetually avoiding that through the policies we create. And we saw that with NFL, just hiring a bunch of
White coaches.
yeah, and but kind of like creating this like narrative of that they are hiring people of color, they are interviewing people
They're
of color.
interviewing people of color. Yeah.
So that's where I go right away is like, where does it show up at work? It's enforcement. And like, what are we going to do with that? Like, how can we shift together in that? It's really impossible conditions. I don't know, Hala, like how you've experienced some of those elements around hiring and like what's happening there for us.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I think this is my experience, and I think some of the data that Aparna has shared recently makes me feel a little bit validated in my experience, but it feels like it's all a facade. Like all of the job listings feel like a facade. All of the apply for a job feels like a facade. Even going through the process of a screening call or whatever feels like a facade because it feels like the person that they are wanting to hire with the saturation that's happening in the market of tech workers. Look at I speak from a tech worker's perspective. Sorry, my cat is breaking things.
Yes, a cat.
I speak from a tech worker's perspective, but there's so many people out there looking for the same roles, and it almost feels like the organizations have already decided who they're going to hire when they post a job listing, but they have to post the job listing. So it just feels so disingenuous and dishonest and harmful, and it hits your confidence. And it's like being in an abusive relationship because you're like, I'll just apply to this one more, and you already know that it's probably going to be just the same. And I think it's really hard. It's an uphill battle, actually, I think, to get to the point where we're able to create some of that change within these orgs. And that's something we need to acknowledge. It's not just like, hey guys, like practice mutual aid and help each other and everything's going to be fixed, because the system is rigged to orient you towards looking out for yourself and towards quote unquote winning and competition. And so I think to some degree, I think some of it is going to be about when you are a person of color or a marginalized person and you believe in and you buy into these concepts, then you are in the position of power to make some of these decisions, just do it. That's number one. Just do it. Make the decisions that are going to actually help people in your community or people feel like they're and actually experience more equitable process. The other thing is I kind of think if you've seen, I'm a part of a group called Tech for Palestine and Entrepreneurs for Palestine. And a lot of the work that is being done there is creating alternatives to some of the big tech platforms, because a lot of us have felt like we can't continue to participate in technology that we know is contributing to genocide or contributing to oppression or surveillance technology, weapons technology. And so we have solutions that we need in our lives, technology that we need in our lives. And so a lot of people are taking the initiative to create alternative tech and alternative platforms. And I feel like a part of that too, the analogy there is like, let's create alternative cultures, alternative organizations. So if you are a person who believes that the culture needs to change, and you have the power and the ability and the resource to create your own organization, to create your own company, to whatever it is, then bring that culture change, let it be embedded in the fabric of how you do your org. Again, it's not like it's intuitive or a quick fix, but it's a way that you can take your resource which you have and apply it and share it with others.
Shout out to Upscrolled. Actually, it's such a great example.
Yeah.
And this, I actually heard this at the Tech for Palestine summit where the CEO was talking about I have the skills to make a social media app that keeps you online. Like I can write that algorithm in my sleep. But instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a social media app that connects you to your loved ones, gives you just enough information that you need, and gets you back out in the world. And they went from 120,000 people to now I think 5 million people on the platform overnight after TikTok, did their corruption. And so, yeah, like I think I just want to shout them out because they're such a great example of that, of like what you can do when you're choosing collective care and using the skills that you have to better the world. And we want that.
And we want that. As you both have been talking, there's two things that have come up for me. One, Hala, you talked about these ghost job postings, and there's been a lot of chatter on Blind and on Reddit that companies like Indeed and Glassdoor and even LinkedIn are encouraging employers to create these ghost postings to collect data on the kind of worker that's looking for a job right now, which is so gross. And I think that for organizations that do these kinds of things, it's so cruel, in my opinion, to put an already marginalized person through all of the hoops of the resume screens. And y'all, at our level, we're not just doing the resume screens and like 2 rounds of interviews. No, we're doing like day-long interview loops. We're doing presentations. There's panels. You're creating content. You're analyzing data. You're doing a ton of work, right? For a senior role that you're applying for, a mid-career role that you're applying for. When the hiring manager already has a person in mind and they already are going to give that job to that person, and the cruelty of extracting the time and the energy and the emotional labor and also the ideas, right? Like the actual like labor of a person who is probably far more stressed. Their like safety net is probably way smaller already. So that's one thing about the cruelty of what's being encouraged. But when you were talking about DEI specifically, I wrote down this thing on my note. I said, DEI without mutuality becomes status threat. DEI without mutuality becomes status threat. And what have we seen in the last 5 or 6 years is that there was this 18-month period where people of color, queer and trans folks, right? Like folks with multiple marginalized identities were for just a moment put on a pedestal. Right. And it wasn't rooted in care. It wasn't rooted in mutuality. It was rooted in PR. And what it created was a lot of people with dominant identities feeling like their ability to move and progress in an organization was under threat, that they were not getting opportunities because they were Black or brown or queer or a woman. And what it has resulted in, and we have all seen it and felt it in such a tremendous and acute way over the past year, specifically as Trump has come into office and the politic around any of those alphabet soup, right? Whether it's DEI or JEDI or DIB, is that there seems to be an implicit agreement that you don't offer opportunities to people with marginalized identities. And I am watching as my friends that are queer and trans not get hired. And I think to myself, oh, is it because half the states in America are unsafe for this individual? So you don't want to hire somebody that might not be able to travel places for work, right? Like we have watched our friends that are Arab not get jobs, not get promoted and or get fired just simply for being Arab. And also specifically for being Palestinian, right? Or having proximity to Palestine. We're seeing, so I just like, that's kind of where my mind went, is we're seeing behaviors that come from status threat because our work of DEI was never rooted in collective care.
No, it was performative. It was tokenization and performative, and that harms everybody. That harms the marginalized communities, and then it harms everybody collectively because there then is a backlash. Yeah.
Lars, what's coming up for you, Senior Director of DEI, formerly?
And there's actually like tears in my eyes. And I think, I think you summarized it really well, Aparna, that like when when we are trying to rig the game while selling hyper competition and individuality, like this is where identity politics go completely wrong. And it's an impossible job for a DEI person. Like it's a really weird position to be put into. And there's some good that you can do. You can stop harm. You can stop, people from getting fired. You can, there's good things. But when it comes to programmatically trying to shift the system under these conditions, to both of your points, like there's nowhere to go. And it has nothing to do about the actual cultural substance that we can be learning and changing our cultures around. That doesn't happen through program. It happens through recognition of the person next to you's full humanity and an interest in their well-being and in their ways of thinking and what value they bring and what they want to leave with the world. It's a completely different conversation than advancement strategy, So yeah, it's a really painful bypass.
Mm-hmm. So I wanna move us. We totally did stay with the script, but I do want to ask you something that I wrote down as I was scripting this, which is, what would it look like if we as women, people of color, immigrants, queer, trans folks, I mean, the invitation is open to everybody, but let's start with ourselves, operated with mutuality, right? We're not asking for charity. How do we build something that liberates us and isn't just a rebrand of the same systems of extraction that we see other people playing out?
I think it's so incremental, and it's like small things that lead to bigger cultural change. But I think that it starts with individuals within organizations doing the things that they know are right. I mean, we've all been in an organization, in a situation where we're like, this is wrong. This person is
Mhm.
getting this kind of performance review because there's a quota that says this many people can be called exceeds expectations, and so I have to put them in the like doesn't meet expectations bucket or whatever because there's a quota. So we can speak up against practices that we know are wrong. We can do the hard thing. We can promote people that we know have been doing good work, and not fall prey to the whole like hyper competitive um, culture and structure. And that might mean that we don't get as far as maybe we would have if we would have stepped on somebody else's shoulders, and I think there's a big question here for a lot of people in these industries with like inflated pay and inflated even sense of entitlement of like what I should be getting by working at a big org like this. It's like, can we be real with each other about what's enough? What's good enough? Can I
Mhm.
root myself in what's good enough and be like, I'm content. I'm good where I'm at. And so I'm going to your earlier question, I might have to quote unquote sacrifice something or, you know, put something at risk in order to do what I know is right for the collective and for the group. I also think little things like establishing communities of practice within organizations is a way for people to start to practice community, right? Whether it's
Yeah.
communities of practice around a technical concept, like let's all get together and like learn this technology once a week together or whatever. But it starts to establish a sense of reciprocity and like you'll do it this week, I'll present next week, and it's not for the purpose of a work goal that we've been incentivized by, but
Yeah.
rather establishing more meaning and kind of creating opportunities for that within orgs. So just a couple of ideas.
Lars, when I said that we might cry later, I was just joking.
Hey. Yeah, like what is on the other side of self-advocacy? I think I want to speak to that piece as someone, as I shared, like fully indoctrinated into this culture, and something that I'm learning is that one, the playbook already exists. When you are a white collar worker, to Hala's earlier point, we like to pretend like we're creating everything and do a pretty poor job at citing who we've learned from and who we're taking from. And I think one thing that we can rest into in this topic is that this already exists. The models exist in the world. There are companies that exist that are doing it differently. There are entire cultures that are doing this. And there are radical humans who exist in this culture who are actively fighting for the counterculture that exists. And so we can rest into the fact that if we just step outside of the by design isolation that our class privilege and our white collar material privilege creates, we can actually just kind of learn. And why that's important is under the framing of obsession of your self-advocacy, you can take some of the pressure off. Like white collar workers are one of the most anxious people in the world because there's so much pressure because you're doing it all by yourself and you have to do all these things and do the dance and like say it the right way and all of that.
Yeah.
And there's actually this path can offer less pressure in your life. And to Hala's point, there's also that means like letting a little bit of risk come through. And how do we do that inside of a corporation where that system already exists? I think the relationships is where we start. And getting connected to other organizations. I always come back to Tech Workers Coalition that exists to help us try to find these models, but you literally can't do it yourself. And I think the last thing I'll say, part of my soapbox, is I'm actually thinking about another thing that you said at the very beginning of the podcast, Hala, around like using your power. Like there's the playbook already exists, and we have a unique amount of access, power, and influence in literally what is happening in the world everywhere. And I think once we start to share that responsibility with our neighbor, with our coworker, then things start to widen a little bit. Like mutual responsibility shifts when you actually recognize that you're responsible. And these are all like very beginning steps to making change possible. So yeah, that's what's coming up for me.
Oh, maybe I'll cry too. Um,
You should try it.
It's just okay.
okay, you both know me, and you know that that is never going to happen publicly ever. I only cry in my car. Literally, that's the only place. Lars, like you and I think last year I shared with you like this phase that I went through where I was so angry because I had come out of my sabbatical and I thought that all of the people that had advocated for or championed would step up and do the same for me. I just was like depressed and angry and I felt humiliated. And I think you might have actually asked me, you were like, well, then like, why do you keep doing this for other people if it's not coming back to you?
Mm.
It was, and I just, and I've been asked that question many, many times. And now, like, I feel like I'm in a much more grounded place. And I think the truth is for me that I don't want to live in a world where we stop doing that for other people just because it isn't coming back to us. I just don't want to live in that world. I don't want to live in the world. I will do the free childcare for my neighbors because I don't want to live in a world where a mom can't ask me to watch her kids for an hour so she can get something else done. And we already know what the likely future looks like. We have ample post-apocalyptic, sci-fi fiction books, right? We have Like we have Octavia Butler's prophecy in the form of a parable of the sower. And we know what this possible and likely on our current trajectory future looks like. And when I read those books, I'm just like, I don't actually want this. I don't want to live in this world. Also, I don't want to eat rats or maybe like rabbits and acorn flour bread. Like I love my white flour bread. I would like for us to continue to grow wheat so I can have that, you know? Um, yeah, yeah, like I feel like mutuality is a pathway into living in a world that we like, and we like ourselves in that world as well. Um, how we end every episode with asking people one sort of takeaway and one invitation of what a listener should do now that they've listened to us for almost an hour. And yeah, we can take a second. What's a takeaway and what's one sort of, let's say, concrete-ish action?
I think a takeaway that I have continued to try to embed in people's brains, like even through the community work, through Yohada, and through bringing people together and having a lot of the action and the events be driven by people, um, is for people to understand that they have power. We have such an issue of really believing that I can do something and giving people that sense that you have power. You can think of a thought and you can make it happen in the world. Like you have that power. I think it's so important. I think, and I don't stick to rules. So here's my second takeaway is that live a life outside of your work. Really, really, really live a life outside of your work, because work and corporations and companies and capitalism will have you thinking that that is your reason for being. And then if you lose that, which we're all going to at some point, if you haven't already, like we'll be in cycles where you lose that access and that security, and you must be able to know that you can survive outside of who you are at work. And then an action, I guess, is like take initiative. Like take initiative today with a small thing, something that you can do for somebody else, and just do it.
Something I'm taking away from spending time with you both in this episode is, and something that I'm like trying to unlearn, that I think also is interesting as a practice for the next week, is try to track less about what you give or you take and focus more on what you're sharing, and just see what that feels like to let generosity, let reciprocity just kind of like live in your body a little bit, like truly somatically, like. And this is something that I've been practicing the past like month, is trying to let generosity like actually build in my body. And I've found that when it is, I feel a lot wider. Like possibility is way wider. Connecting with people feels different. So unintentionally, I guess I'm offering a somatic exercise of like connect to the difference of give versus take, and let sharing, whatever that core word is, spend a little time in your body and see what happens. See how you interact with people at work, see what you value, and play.
You know, my takeaway was going to be unlearning as well. But I think let me start with the action, which is notice when you choose not to do something for somebody when you easily could have. You could have made a different choice, right? And ask yourself why. Is it because that person annoys you? Is it because they didn't come to your birthday, or they didn't get you a gift, or what is it? Maybe they're not a cat person. And but when there are moments where you could easily, yeah, we don't want those people. But just notice that, right? Like notice when you don't want to help somebody, but helping them would be super easy. Saying somebody's name in a room would be super easy. Just notice that. Yeah, and I think my own takeaway is that finding my identity outside of work. Like I have really struggled with it. And this week, a really dear friend is here from out of town, and we were, walking around, and we walked into a yarn store. And then I realized that she can knit things, like real things. And she's like, "Why don't you take a knitting class?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't have time for this." But I used to love to knit. As a kid, I was like knitting constantly.
And
And the resistance to not have a life outside of work is, yeah, it's like a real struggle. So with that, I'm going to bring us to a close. This was our 8th episode of the Circle Back Club Friends. We talked about so many things, the myth of self-advocacy, naming the girl boss. Can I just call it the girl boss industrial complex?
Yeah.
Right. We talked about mutual aid at work as a practice. We talked about how it's not charity and how we look out for each other. Hala, I love you. Thank you. Thank you for your
same to
friendship.
you.
Thank you for your fierce love for community, your wisdom. You have the biggest heart. And also thank you for giving me a new nephew, because the auntie life just loves the new addition. So
Oh,
he's the sweetest, Lars. He's like, honestly, he came to my house and he was like, "This is my first night here." And I was like, "You can
Yeah.
stay forever." So thank you for being here with us.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
It was such a pleasure.
And guess what? In our next episode, actually, in our next episode, we are going to talk about, I think, really spending a little bit more time on the cost of not living into what we've talked about today. We're going to talk about the way that white collar jobs isolate us and create loneliness. By design, of course, we're going to get into the data, the stories. So if it's something that you've felt, something you want to learn more about, subscribe so you don't miss it, and can't wait to learn with you.
And if this episode mattered to you, if it made you cry, share it with somebody in your life who has worked really hard at all of the quote unquote right things and still hit a wall. And, reach out to us. You can email us at hello@circleback.club. You can invite us to have some of these conversations in your company. I'm signing off. This has been Aparna.
I'm Lars.
And we'll circle back.